Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Business Growth Show, where we talk about all components of business and how to utilize them for exponential growth. My name is Athin Cassiotis. I'm a business growth expert who helps business owners grow and scale to create wealth and freedom. And today, I have an awesome guest. He's a speaker, mentor, facilitator, podcaster, author, and is known as the Excellence Guy. From being 6,000 foot underground in a gold mine to starting an education business that grew to have 4,000 plus students, to spending years working in venture capital, he has seen it all. He has listed companies on multiple international stock exchanges, and his financial services group has settled more than $3 billion in loans over 20 years. And is the unique distinction of having sold more than $1 billion in mortgages from stage. And he holds 2 master's degrees, an MBA and an MSc, which is in software engineering. And he is currently a fellow of the MFAA Mortgage and Finance Association of Australia and a certified speaking professional with the Professional Speakers Australia and past chapter president of PSA in Western Australia and a member of the AICD, which is the Australian Institute of Company Directors. And in 2018, he published Dive In, Lessons Learned Since Business School. And he works with people and companies on their journey to excellence by enabling them to show up as the best versions of themselves every day. Welcome, Rael Bricker, and thank you for being on my show.
It's a pleasure. Thank you, Athin, for having me on the show.
You're welcome, mate. I'm sure it's going to be great for everyone watching and listening today. So you're a very successful entrepreneur. So for those people who don't know who you are, please introduce yourself by telling us about you and your journey.
Okay, well, my journey, I guess, I've always known I was going to be an entrepreneur. It's probably from the age of about 14. I kind of knew that I'd always be my own boss. I hated authority. I was non-compliant in that respect, even at school. And so I always knew that I needed to be my own boss. I needed to do my own thing. Started my first businesses when I was still at school. Not all was successful. And the most tragic failure of the time was when I worked for an electronics shop that sold car radios. And I decided that I have this absolute and utter belief in myself. And I think that's almost core to being an entrepreneur, is that you have to believe in yourself and believe in your failures. And so I started this business installing radios in people's cars. It was before the days of nice, big fitted radios. And this woman came into the shop. She bought a car radio. She wanted someone to fit it. I said, I'll do it. No problem. Come over to my house this afternoon. I think I was all of about 15. I made such a mess of the interior of her car. It cost me money to have it fixed. But I learned then that any business I go into would have to use my mind, not my hands. Although as an engineer, I love tinkering and I have lots of tools at home and I'm always building things and making things, none of it is craftsman special. So that was the biggest lesson I learned from my first major business failure. I mean, my first business started in 1990 in South Africa. The year Nelson Mandela was released, there was a hunger for education, particularly amongst the previously disadvantaged and previously disenfranchised masses in South Africa. We started a business. We had no idea what the competitors were doing. We just said, it's a good idea, let's start a business. And we did, and we had 20 students in 1990. And by the time we reverse listed in 96, we had 4,000 students over 6 campuses. So huge growth. Some of it was being in the right place at the right time. And some of it we can discuss further later was about guerrilla marketing and how we marketed on a low budget to get the growth that we needed. And we had no internet. We had no Google ads. We had no SEO. So it was very different level of marketing. Subsequent to that, I ended up in venture capital for 5 years. Came to Australia and joined a venture capital fund here that had 8 million in capital, small little fund. We listed that on the ASX at $22 million. So that was my second sort of foray into stock markets. In 2001, they asked me to move to Sydney. And I know you're based in Sydney, but respectfully, I went. I like the West Coast. The sea's a lot warmer and calmer. And I think I'll stay in Perth and raise my kids. And so I did. And went out again on my own, started a mortgage business through a series of coincidences, had nothing to do with actually wanting to be a mortgage broker, but I ended up being a mortgage broker and doing a good job for people. And I guess that was the key to it. Was most of it was around venture capital, raising money, And suddenly people said, we need a loan. And I went, have no idea how to do that, but I'll find out. And I think that's the other big business lesson is people don't mind if you don't know the answer, as long as you know where to find the answer. And so, yeah, started that business 2001, still own it today, spend about 50% of my time in that business. And that's done just over 3.2 billion in mortgages now. I should update my bio at some point. And the last major turning point was exactly 10 years ago, April the 22nd, 2013, when I was training for a marathon after doing a season of triathlons, and they discovered that I had 2 blocked arteries and needed 2 cardiac stents. And that focused me on doing what I'm passionate about, which is being on stage and talking about things. And for many years, I'd spoken about mortgages, finance, retirement, etc. And I said, but I've actually been in business all this time. I should talk about business. And so hence, that was the journey to publishing my book in 2018 and my journey to becoming a professional speaker. My first professional speaking gigs were in 2015. And in 2019, I became a certified speaking professional as a member of Professional Speakers Australia. So that's sort of the journey to where I find myself now. About 50% of my time as a speaker, coach, and facilitator. And I tend to use the word mentor, not coach, but everyone knows the word coach, so I kind of throw it in. But I mentor more than I coach, and I do a lot of facilitation, particularly in the strategy area, and professional speaking in anything that's got to do with making people more excellent.
Yeah, awesome, mate. Thank you for sharing that. It's a very, very powerful story, and a bit more of those intricacies of where it started and where the journey took you. And, you know, let's start a little bit on venture capital here, right? Because this is an interesting one. You spent years working in that, and businesses that obviously want to grow quite large, they may look at getting venture capital in to take them to that next level. So, you know, if we're a business owner and we're looking at, you know, we've got a great idea and we want to go there, what key tips can you give us if we're looking at getting venture capital to our company?
Well, okay, so it's something you said there made it quite interesting. You said have a good idea. So you get, I guess, a couple stages of investors in that space. You get the angel investors, and those are the guys you see on TV, you know, wow, you know, you're going to make super duper widgets, you know, we'll put in $500,000 because we love your super duper widgets. Okay. So there are guys on the Shark Tank on TV, which is really all just prototypes and test beds. And so no one wants to know you've got a good idea. They want to at least see that you've invested some sweat equity in it. But the early stage angel investors have probably got the highest level of risk. They're venture capitalists, but they are really at the high risk end, not really a proven market, generally a proven product. The next stage is the venture capitalist, and you get, it's more sophisticated in the American system, but you have rounds 1, 2, 3, round A, B, C of venture capital. And each one is a decreasing risk and therefore decreasing return generally on the investment. What do the investors look at? I mean, I was employed by the fund, or I was a consultant to the first fund and employed by the second fund because of my tech background, because of having a master's in software engineering, to look at tech acquisitions. It was that time, 1999 to 2001, 2002, where the tech boom was growing dramatically around the world. And so all the venture funds were looking at tech and technology acquisitions, and not sort of, you know, going into boring manufacturing. Not saying manufacturing is boring, but, you know, stock standard sort of manufacturing or retail type operation. So, you know, could I advise people in that space? Not really. Could I advise on tech investment? Absolutely, because that's what I did. So I guess the market in tech is moving so quickly now that people are taking almost stupid risks because, you know, I'll give you an example. One of the areas that I speak about is practical applications of AI technology. So I'm not into, this is amazing, we can do this and spend 3 days working on ChatGPT. That's not what I talk about. I talk about all the practical applications in our lives today. Okay. But tech is moving so fast that as a venture capitalist now, it's quite a challenge to actually sort out what are the right things to be investing in. I mean, in the 2 months since I started watching a particular website that lists all AI applications, it's gone from 1,400 to 3,400 in less than 2 months. And so, you know, in the VC space, I think the tech space is probably a bit overcrowded now. And to go back to your question, what do the venture capitalists look for? They look for something that resonates with not only their values, but also resonates with them as something they can make money out of. Let's call a spade a spade. Venture capitalists are investing to make money. You know, if your business is going to change the world, but leave you poor, probably not a good venture capital target. I know that sounds harsh and being an absolute capitalist when I say that, and that's not my whole persona, by the way, but that is the venture capital persona. It is, why are we going to put money into this business? What are we going to get in return? There are very few venture capitalists will go, that's amazing and it's going to save the world. Let's invest in that business.
Yeah.
So as long as the business numbers and projections make sense to an investor, that's what it is. It makes sense when I mean that, you know, that the numbers don't go, oh, we're going to sell 100 this year and 10,000 next year. That's not making sense. It's got to be realistic. There's got to be rationales. And the biggest problem we saw in venture capital, and you see it today on Shark Tank, someone with the most amazing idea, but has no handle on the numbers, and very few venture capitalists will invest in those businesses when the brains and the entrepreneur doesn't really understand the background to the numbers. They just go, well, we should be selling this product. It's a better widget, but, you know, and I'm going to make it better and better and better, but they don't understand the numbers and the imperative to actually generate revenue. And I think that's what venture capitalists look for today, is the ability to generate revenue, make profits, and make a return on the investment.
Yeah, I love that. So true, right? As much as we want to do great things, business is still to make money, right? In there and grow, and whether it's an investment or your own business. So love all of those distinction there. And an interesting one that you have experience is listing companies on multiple stock exchanges, right? Not many people can say that. And that's a tough thing, obviously, building it up to that point where you want to list and do an IPO or whatever process that is. So I'd like to know what some of the key challenges you had to overcome, because it's a big effort, right? Getting to that stage. So what key challenges do you have to overcome so that people are aware of them?
They were two very different experiences. So the first one in South Africa was effectively what they call a reverse listing. There was a company that was, you know, in the sort of technology education space, to call it that, but really just sort of ambling along, you know, just like the duck cruising on the top of the water, just sort of cruising along. And we went, I happened to know the chairman of the fund. I had met him a few years before, and I literally called him up. It wasn't a fund, sorry, it was a business. And I called him up and I said, don't you want to buy my business? And he went, what do you mean? I went, you know, you've been in this aspect of education for a while, and the growth we see, look at the growth we've had, is in face-to-face classroom-based education. There's a massive hunger for it in South Africa. And so we negotiated, and there's a funny tech story here. I was on holiday in Europe with my wife, on a budget holiday, you know, backpacking type holiday. And I remember being on the train from London to Paris, talking on a mobile phone, and in those days paying $2 a minute or something. It was a ridiculous cost. But negotiating the final contract terms while on the train from London to Paris on this backpacking holiday. So, but you know, even then, technology, and this was in, you know, many years ago, it was 1996, the technology allowed us to be global citizens. So then we joined this listed company. I took on the managing director role of one of the other listed companies in the group. And then we were tasked with doing acquisitions for them. It's a very different space, but we had as our currency to acquire things, the shares, the scrip, the shares. So we could issue more and more shares. So we sold out at 90 cents a share. We sold into this business. We then acquired 9 other businesses, and the share price went from 90 cents to equivalent of $14, but 14 Rand in South Africa at the time. It was the right place at the right time. Again, hunger for companies. We grew rapidly. The business was tiny when we went in, and we grew it through 9 acquisitions. So that was very different. I was managing director of a listed company called Mast at the time, which was an associated company of that. So that was a lot of fun. The venture capital listing was a company called Loftus Capital. And that was interesting because it was also something called a pooled development fund. It was a weird tax structure in Australia where the fund was treated like a super fund, but it wasn't a super fund as long as it met certain investment guidelines. It today is still listed, but it's changed its structure because that was too restrictive on its investments. So we went out, it had 8 million in the fund when we started. We went out, wrote a prospectus of 108 pages, which is interesting, a lot of fun, just writing a 108-page prospectus on WordPerfect 5.1 before the invention of Microsoft Word. Okay. And the ability to edit that, and it was physically quite demanding and challenging, just getting the final document ready to go to our printers, basically, our graphic designers. We raised 22 million on that raising. That was a pure initial public offering. We went out. It was underwritten by a couple of high net worth investors already in the fund. So we knew we'd get to a minimum of 6 or 7 million, but we traveled. My managing director and I did 200,000 air miles in the space of 8 months doing the capital raising, and that was just within Australia. So I was literally on a plane, twice or 3 times a week from Perth to the eastern states. And that's so that was a different experience. The compliance we had to go through, the number of times, the prospectus was rejected by the ASX. We had to go back and make changes, and then getting to that point of listing, and then having a tech crash 3 months later, which was a bigger challenge.
Wow, so interesting. And it was I love the bits there about how it was, the little things that came up around that time, and what you had to think about. Like, this is a big effort, right? Like, massive prospectus and being able to put it in, and so very interesting with all of that and getting it through, because there's a lot of structures, and ASX we're quite stringent here in Australia. So very cool that you got to go through that process. One other thing that is very unique about you is that you've sold more than $1 billion in mortgages on stage, right? Not many people can say that. And I know you do a lot of speaking as well, and there's a difference between just speaking in general, but actually, selling, a lot from stage as well. So what are some tips, or what are some key things do you think in your pitch that made you get such great results?
The biggest one is not being a banker. I know that's weird, and in my mortgage business, I've never employed ex-bankers, and that's not a slight. And all my banker friends, and I have some really good friends in the industry after this length of time, joke about that we don't have any ex-bankers on our staff. And there was a reason behind it, and the success. So let me give you a bit of the history. We started in 2001. 2004, I met a property developer, property sales organization based out of Brisbane. And they said to me, do you want to do a seminar for us in Perth? I said, sure, I'll talk about finance and mortgages. And at the end of the seminar, they went, wow. Firstly, there was this queue of people after the seminar. There were probably 50 people at this first seminar wanting to make appointments to see me. And so that's how I started that process to selling $1 billion of mortgages from stage. But the feedback I got, and when I look back at those presentations, God, they were amateurish, okay? But I spoke in English. I spoke in human speak, not bank speak. And I learned early on in the piece to use, and I've been on a course many years later from a guy by the name of Michael Grinder, who taught me about nonverbal communication from stage. But I'd kind of learned some of those techniques early on, and I'll give that example. And seeing we're on video, not only audio, but what I would do on stage is start at the audience's left-hand side, so my right, and actually position myself there and talk about the start of their journey to investing in property. And again, because I wasn't an ex-banker, I used English, not bank words. So, you hear people talk about LVR and whatever. Well, that's a three-letter acronym. I don't care. I explained to them, the bank will lend you up to 80% of the property value. They happen to call it an LVR, but I'm just going to talk about 80% of the value of your property. And that people understood and appreciated that. And then from a stagecraft point of view, I would stand on the right hand, on their left, so my right, and talk about the start of their journey. I would then move to the middle of the stage and talk about their growth part of their journey. So this is the business growth podcast, right? But so I would start off with the acquisition phase, then the growth phase, and then I would move to their right-hand side, in other words, my left, which is the how do you retire on your property portfolio. But by each one of those positions, they saw a different person on stage, even though it was by all me. And then I'd be talking about the retirement, and I'd say, but remember, when you acquired property, and I'd go back to that position on stage, talking about the acquisition phase. So there were little stagecraft things that I learned early on. And the biggest thing was keeping it simple. One of the techniques I was taught many years ago was not to have more than 3 or 4 words on a PowerPoint slide. Well, that's been my philosophy ever since. And I still see people stand up and do complex graphs with 27 colored lines on it on a screen. And I go, no one understands what you're talking about. And so I think the key to that success was simplicity, openness, and the fact that even when I meet with clients, so yes, it's all very well to do the great sales job on stage, but you have to follow through. And so I'd make these appointments with clients and meet them. And there was not a computer in sight. Yes, there would be a computer if I needed to look up an interest rate or something like that. But I taught my staff early on, and that's another thing about business, about building relationships with people. Talk to them one-on-one. Convince them that you're the expert. Use pen and paper. In fact, on all our tables in the office here, in the mortgage offices, there are notepads and multiple colored pens. So draw pictures. People understand colors. So we'd say this is the red house, and this is the green house, and this is the purple house, and here's the loan for the purple house, and here's the loan for the green one and the red one. And people got that. They understood that level of simplicity. And if they went, yeah, I get this, I'm an accountant, great, I'd take it up a notch. But for most people, explaining at that level, and as a mortgage broker, what that did for me was it made me happy that I had explained things in the right way to the client, that I could sleep at night knowing the client understood what they were getting into. Because a lot of people just go, yeah, just sign here, just sign here, just sign here, whatever. I mean, the famous advert from Aussie John, from Aussie Home Loans was, in the early days when you hear Aussie John and say, I'm Aussie John, our consultants will come to your house, which I think is a problem in the first place because we wanted to be seen as professionals. I haven't done a home visit for 20 years. Not because I'm arrogant, but I see myself no different to their accountant, their financial planner, or their lawyer or their doctor, and none of those people visit them at home. So why should mortgage brokers? But Aussie John used to say something interesting. He used to say, our consultants will come to your house, they'll put all the data into the computer system, and the computer will tell you which is the best loan for you. Sounds logical, but think about that statement. Not anything in that statement tells you how good the person is who's sitting in front of you. Tells you their computer system's good. Whereas I wanted my staff to build those one-on-one relationships. So that's how we were successful. I built those I have 14,500 clients that still call on me today, 3 generations later. So grandparents were my clients 20 years ago, then the parents, and now the kids are buying property. I have generational clients.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that. And I love the simplicity. I think that's the key takeaway, right? Is especially if we're really good at what we do, it's not doing it in our technical language, but more doing it in what people will understand. I think that was a really awesome thing about what you shared there. So thanks, Rael, with that. That was really awesome. And you work with people and companies on their journey to excellence, by enabling them to show up as their best versions of themselves every day. So firstly, because everyone probably thinks excellence a little bit differently. So how do you define excellence, and why should we really strive for it?
Well, let's put it this way. Perfection is unachievable. All right. Even though the Instagram world today, everyone looks at us, oh God, that person's perfect. Perfect complexion, perfect body. No one is perfect. And by extension, perfection is just going to put us all in the nut house and drive us mad with, depression because we can't achieve perfection. But what we can achieve is excellence, which is showing up as the best version of ourselves every day. And by extension, every company, every business has people in it. And so therefore, when I say ourselves, I'm talking about if every single employee in a business shows up as the best version of themselves, the business will show up as the best version of itself. Is it perfect? No. Do we care that it's perfect? No. But do we want people to set that as the benchmark? And in Australia, we do have a culture of, whether you subscribe to it or not, a culture of drinking excessive amounts of alcohol. Okay. And I've said to people along the way in companies, and they go, oh geez, I had such a bender last night, I feel horrible. I said, okay, but in your hungover state, if you just focus on being the best version of yourself in that hungover state, you've achieved more than just complaining about being hungover. I'm not condoning being hungover at work and drinking and all those things. That's not what I'm doing. But that's what excellence is. It's about having the mindset to say, even though I feel horrible this morning, I'm still going to show up as the best version of my feeling horrible self. Okay. And I guess that's the difference in a culture of an organization. So I break excellence down into three components: strategy, culture, and leadership. And that you need all three of those to be firing correctly to get a return on excellence. To actually get the returns on making your business excellent, you need all three of those things to be firing, all at the same time. And so that's the way I look at it. Is if you've got leadership, culture, and strategy all in alignment, then your business is excellent, because it's then showing up as the best version of itself every day.
Yeah, I love that. So powerful. All those different areas of excellence. And another example I can think of is if you don't get much sleep one night, right? But don't use that as the excuse. But how can you be the best version of yourself in that excellence? I love that, Rael, because nothing's ever perfect. Yeah, really, really powerful.
But interestingly, I was at a talk about burnout the other night, and the person talking has a PhD in the space of burnout, right? Her PhD was researching what causes burnout, etc. And one of the things she said, and exactly that example. So maybe, as I said, I wasn't condoning, excessive drinking, but yes, you've had a bad night's sleep, whatever the case may be. You're really tired when you get to work. I've got beanbags around the office here, and I've encouraged staff who've got, oh God, I had such a bad night. I've said, take a beanbag, go and sit in the corner, and go and have 15-minute power nap in the corner. How many bosses would do that? I don't know. But in the first time I told someone to do that, they thought I was completely nuts. And 15 minutes later, they walked in my office and went, I feel like a new person. Because not only have I taken that, so one of the problems of burnout is that we're always on stress. And again, the person who spoke to us about this was has got a PhD in the area. I'm not going to try and emulate what they said. But one of the key causes of burnout, though, was stress, when you don't have the release valve. So you always on, you're always stressed, you don't have that timeout. And that person, by not having slept was feeling stressed because they were trying to stay awake, by having that 15-minute power nap in a beanbag, they've gone, wow, it's a new day. I feel alive, even though they've only had 15 minutes sleep and they missed out on 4 hours last night. So that's, that's one of the ways that I've done that in my businesses, is just to create that culture where it's okay to say, I'm not at my best today, but I'm at the best version of my not at my best self.
Yeah, I love that. So powerful. And yes, I love my power naps, or just getting out sometimes and going for a bit of a walk or something like that to, get away from, the environment, I think is, a powerful way of doing it as well. If it's not just sleep, but just to relieve some of that stress and focus. So yeah, love all of that, mate. Really powerful things. You touched on culture a bit there. So let's delve into culture a little bit more, which, is linked to leadership too, right? Where we want to become better leaders, but then also so that we can impact, I guess, the culture in the business, which is really powerful. So I guess a two-pronged question here, but let's talk about both, about, important things about being a great leader, but then how that, we can affect everybody else in the business to, create that culture we desire.
Okay, so I did quite a bit of research into culture. I interviewed 85 companies, and it's going to be my third book. And I asked them, what are the drivers? I asked them lots of questions, but the key one was, what are the drivers of culture in their organization? And not all of them had great cultures, by the way. About 25 of them had actually got toxic cultures. But I wanted to get both perspectives. And so one of the things that came out of it was not a vision and mission statement. And I often on stage, and I love that idea, 500 people from different companies in a room, and I'm on stage talking, and I go, I'll bet that I can tell every one of you what your mission statement is of your business, or your vision statement. And I'll go, is this guy a genius or what, that he knows everyone's vision and mission statement? And I go, no. Okay. All I'm doing is I say, I'll bet you your company says the following on the wall somewhere. It says, we are the best, fill in the blanks. Using the best people, technology, blah, 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 fill in the blanks. In the open brackets, fill in your industry name. That's a standard mission statement or vision statement for most companies. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the values and the purpose that drive the organization. That comes from the leadership, but it's not imposed. It's lived by leadership. That's the big difference. It's not the leaders going to the top of the mountain, smoking a few joints, but I'm promoting alcohol and drugs. No, I'm not. Okay. But that's what I think sometimes, when the leadership goes away to the top of the mountain and comes back with this, wow, we now know what our vision is and our purpose. Well, that's great, but unless they live it, and there's the link to the leadership, the leaders have to embody it. I'm one of those leaders who believes in sharing. If I'm not feeling my best on a day, I'll come in and tell the staff I'm not feeling great today, or whatever the case may be. Or I had a terrible meeting with that client. They didn't like me. Doesn't happen very often, but it does happen. Okay. And so I've encouraged, created a culture as a leader of people being able to share things, to have a laugh, to have a joke in a way that is not discriminatory, because that's become a huge issue. The old boys club. I mean, I worked underground. You started my bio with from 6,000 feet underground. I worked underground in an entirely male-dominated industry. The mine shaft that I worked on had 5,500 staff on the shaft, and totally male. I mean, there were probably 5 female office staff, and that was about it. Of the 5,500 on that shaft, and there were 9 shafts, and a 10th one being sunk when I was working there, but 9 operating mine shafts on that site. In a male-dominated environment where sexist and racist jokes, and that was much before the dropping of apartheid and the release of Nelson Mandela, So sexist and racist jokes, discriminatory jokes. You know, I'm 5'6", and I was of the 55,000 employees, I was the only person of my religion. And so there was a lot of discrimination in that respect. And so I think back to those days and how the world has changed, and how as leaders we can't do that anymore. We can't be part of that culture that perpetuates, you know, discrimination on any basis. But I think that's the true test of leadership today, is how you create a culture where you don't have that, where you embrace difference, you embrace different ideologies, but at the same time you live what you want as the value set and purpose of the organization.
Yeah, awesome. Love that, mate. Really powerful and this is the key difference really with growing and scaling the business, right? Because we can't do it all themselves, and really creating that awesome container, culture there in the business. And before you mentioned guerrilla marketing, and you said maybe we'll talk about it a bit later. So I think I have to ask you the question a little bit more. Tell us a bit more about this guerrilla marketing.
So we had no money. We started this business in South Africa, and in fact, we started the business with zero money. Like we borrowed a few thousand from each of our parents, and that was about it. And so we had to find ways of being clever in our marketing. So a few things we did where you could today track stuff through, you know, IP address tracking and all that kind of stuff. We did it very much the old-fashioned way. So I'll give you examples of the guerrilla marketing. We went to the main newspapers, both the and I use the word black and white, not because that was the color of the print. There was a particular newspaper aimed at the black people in South Africa. This is this was just after the release of Nelson Mandela, but one of the biggest newspapers was still called the Sowetan, which was aimed at the majority of the black population. And in Johannesburg, there was a newspaper called the Star, which was primarily aimed at the white population. Primarily, I mean, there was a lot of crossover, but those were the two primary newspapers. And we went to them and said, nobody had ever advertised on the bottom of the TV guide. Now, again, there was no electronic program guides on the TVs, you know, no remote controls. You had to stand up and actually press the button on the TV. But everybody consulted the TV guide to see what was on TV that night. And those were printed in the newspaper. And we went to them and said, what one page, we thought about it and said, what one page in the newspaper will people look at every single day? And it was the TV guide. And so we went to the newspapers with this totally audacious proposal to run an advert underneath the TV guide, because we figured people are going to fold the newspaper and leave it open on a table showing that advert all the time. Was it genius? I'd like to think we were, but you know, my partner was a brilliant marketer, and I think together we came up with that idea. And so we started that, and then suddenly our competitors went, oh, that's a great idea, we'll do that, and we'll up the stakes, we'll do it in full color advertising. And that became ridiculously expensive. But then because we had built this relationship with the newspapers already, we went to them and said, we'll take the standby slot, we'll book one a month that we'll pay for, and that hurt when we paid full price, but we'll book it on standby. And if anybody cancels, just put us in straight away. And it was like 20% to the cost. So that was part of the guerrilla marketing we did, was we did this deal. So we looked much bigger than we were, because we were suddenly running an ad a week at 4,000 Rand, but it was actually costing us 800 Rand because we were only paying 20%. And so our competitors looked at us and went, wow, these guys are spending a fortune advertising. And unfortunately, then they had bigger pockets and started advertising more than us. But we created this image of being much bigger than we were through that level. So that was one of the things we did. As we opened new offices, we couldn't afford, lots of staff. So what we did is we used technology, and I've always been a believer in using whatever technology is available. So our Durban office, which is 600 kilometers from Johannesburg, we had one phone there. We had a part-time staff member. When they weren't sitting there, the number was diverted through to our Johannesburg office. And the adverts in Durban all said, please call Debbie with a D, same as the city name D. Call Debbie on this number, local number in Durban. If they called our offices in Johannesburg and said, can they speak to Debbie? We knew straight away that they were phoning from Durban. Very same as you do with IP address tracking and GPS, today, but we were doing it in a very simplistic way. And then the standard answer my staff would go is, oh, sorry, Debbie's not available. My name is Rael. Can I help you? Okay. And that's how we built the business. So the key to our growth, though, was the third aspect of our marketing. In South Africa, year 12 results, so ATARs or HSCs or whatever each different state calls them in Australia, year 12 results were national and released on a national basis on one day, generally between Christmas and New Year. And we had friends who told us the day they were being released. It was fairly publicly known the day. The night before, we went and printed across, we did this 2 years in a row, but it really took our growth from 10% to 50%. That was the impact it had. We printed posters that were A1 or A0 size. That is massive. I mean, that's bigger than a 5 foot or 6 foot person. And we went and found homeless people on the streets, and we paid them to go and plaster each city that we had an office with these the night before the results came out. So literally overnight, people woke up in the morning, there were 5,000 to 10,000 of these posters, and we did black and white print because we couldn't afford color. Okay. And all they said on them was, not happy with your results, call this number, 1-800, whatever our 1-800 number was. That took our business to another level because people were suddenly phoning, thinking it was the education department helpline. And then we'd say to them, well, what are you not happy with? What was your result? What was your ATAR or your HSC? It was your matric in those days in South Africa. Well, great. You can't get into university, but we can offer you an alternative education pathway. And so that was how we grew from that 20 students to 4,000 students, was that once a year campaign where we got our wives, friends, brothers, cousins, aunties in just to help us handle the volume of calls.
Yeah. Wow. I love that. Alternative marketing, right? It's really powerful about doing things differently and being aware about key dates in the year and making them, to your advantage, which I love that. And I know you've got your book as well, Dive In, Lessons Learned since Business School. Tell us, what it's about and how it can help us.
So the book actually for many years was actually called, and while I wrote it, so it took me 3 years. So here's a great growth story. And even though I said how confident I am in myself, I finished my first professional speaking gig. I got on a plane back to Perth and I had an iPad with me and I wrote 2,000 words on an iPad. That's pretty hard when you have no tactile keyboard, I have to say. I'll never do that exercise again. And then for the next 6 or 8 months, I wrote every morning from 5:30 to 6 with a cup of coffee. I just sat on my computer and I dumped stuff. And then I finished this book at about 35,000, 40,000 words. And I read it through from cover to cover and I suddenly got imposter syndrome. And I went, no one wants to hear this story. By the way, the book was called Give Up Control to Gain Control, which is now one of the chapters in the book. But that was the original title. And it was about the fact that you can grow a business through, as an entrepreneur, where you've got control over everything. And the next thing you do is you bring in staff, but in order to make them really productive, you have to empower them. So you have to give up control to gain control of your own life, but to give them control of the job you've employed them to do. So that's the story of the book. It only came about, this title, Lessons Learned Since Business School, literally a month before we were ready to publish. And my publisher or my editor said to me, you know what, these are all the lessons you've learned since you were at business school in 1988. So why don't we call it Dive In? And the first story in the book is about my triathlons and how I dived in the water and had never swum a competitive race in the sea. And I just dived in and went, okay, how bad can this be? And so that in the back of the book says something interesting, and I'll grab This is a real background, by the way. It actually has real things on it. The back of the book says, business does not have to be complicated. Business can be simple. Take a breath, dive in, and adjust the course while you're moving. And that is my philosophy over years of business. And so the book was put away. And this is my imposter syndrome story from 2015 to 2017. No one saw it. And I happened to be in South Africa talking to my cousin, whose wife had just started a small publishing business. And I said, I'm going to send you this manuscript. I'm sure it's horrible, but have a look. And she called me back about a week later and said, I've read it. Just write another 5,000 to 10,000 words and then we can publish it. So I did. And, you know, but she put that confidence back in me that my story had some meaning.
Yeah. Awesome, mate. Love that. Sounds really, really powerful, and love the backstory behind it too. And yeah, it's been a very powerful show today. And I guess as we're getting towards the end of this, what one key piece of advice would you like to give to all the entrepreneurs watching and listening today?
I think that one piece, that was the original name of the book. Okay, that is, give up control to gain control. People often ask me, and there's a chapter in the book, so they can download it. As I've said to you, you're going to put in the show notes, raelbricker.com/free book. They can actually download a PDF version of the book. The idea behind that is, how did I grow my mortgage business? So until 2006, 2006-7, we had something like 18 mortgage brokers working for us, but not a single support staff. I mean, I had a PA and a secretary, but I never had mortgage support staff. And it was that time that I employed my first mortgage support person. And it was about training them on how to take the scribbled notes after an interview with a client, take the client's application and package it up and send it off to the bank. And up to that point, we'd all been doing that ourselves. Every one of my 18 brokers have been doing that themselves. And after that, I cut down to 7 brokers, but I had 4 support staff, and we were turning over 3 times as much because I gave up control of the day-to-day. I didn't have to, the first 3 applications I sat and I checked their work. I went, yep, I'm happy with that, change this word. By the 4th one, I went, you're not going to break any laws if you send it in with a typo. So send it in, doesn't matter. And by that relief, it allowed me to do what I was good at and what every other entrepreneur is good at, generally selling. I know a lot of people go, oh, I'm not a salesman. Well, everyone's a salesman, no matter what you're in. Even if we're out in the pub trying to pick up someone of the opposite sex, you're a salesperson, And so the idea of giving up control is what really took my business to another level. So it allowed me to focus on what I was good at, which was selling and speaking to clients and arranging their mortgages. But I wasn't really good at the paperwork, and I realized that early on. And so it allowed me to give someone else that job and me to focus on what I'm good at. And I think that's where a lot of entrepreneurs go wrong, is they don't focus on what they're good at. They try and do everything.
Yeah, love it, mate. Completely agree. So powerful there. And yeah, we connected through our networks where I learned about your awesome journey from, being 6,000 foot underground in a gold mine to starting an education business to spending years working in venture capital to now being a speaker, mentor, and facilitator. You're an awesome guy. So much value today. And I'm sure you'll continue to help people and companies on their journey to excellence by enabling them to show up as the best versions of themselves every day. I'm very grateful that we connected. I look forward to working with you. So, Rael, how can people find you and get in contact with you?
Best is LinkedIn or so Rael Bricker on LinkedIn, or my website, raelbricker.com. I respond to all my emails personally. I don't have a VA or a PA doing that. I have a VA and a PA, but I don't have them responding. I respond to everything. My mobile number is actually on my website. People want to text me or call me. I'm happy to take calls. I have a philosophy that if someone phones me, I will do my utmost, and probably 99% of the time, to call them back the same day. That's another kind of business growth philosophy, is that you always pay respect to people who've reached out to you. So yeah, raelbricker.com. And as I said, there's an offer of a free book, copy of my book. Dive in at raelbricker.com/free book, or contact me on LinkedIn, connect with me on LinkedIn.
Yeah, awesome, guys. Definitely connect with Rael, LinkedIn, website, got all his connections there, as well as his free book. So there's some awesome value. So thanks, Rael, for that. And yeah, thank you everyone for watching and listening to this show where we talk about everything on business growth. And please like, subscribe, and leave us a 5-star review. You can find me on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube as Athin Cassiotis, or visit my website, athincassiotis.com. And if you want to grow and scale your business, you can reach out to me in any platform to see if we're a good fit. And I completely agree with you, or do I? The only way we know is if you tune in next time. So until next time, remember that our business grows when we learn skills and take action using them in spite of fear. So remember to design your growth and results.